Good evening, everyone. We are so glad to be here with you on this evening at this NCPS new book launch featuring AE, aka Earl Hines. We're so excited to have him here on this evening to share with us from his new book, Adam in the Garden. Everybody that has Adam in the garden, wave your book. Waving my book. Yes, we're really excited about this. So, more on A.E. Hines and Adam in the Garden. In Adam in the Garden, A.E. Hines lyrically examines the thresholds we cross from childhood to adulthood, youth to old age, from rejection to self-acceptance. Using personal narrative and persona, and with a variety of forms, these poems are rich in both eros and pathos as the poet explores queer love and joy that is hard-won. Set in the garden of the body, our fragile earth, and the biblical Eden, these poems conspire to reveal the extraordinary hidden in every moment. A.E. Hines is the author of Adam in the Garden, published by Charlotte Lit Press in 2024, and Any Dumb Animal, Main Street Rag 2021. He has won the Red Wheelbarrow Prize and Palettes Poetry's Love and Eros Prize, and has been a finalist for the Montreal International Poetry Prize. His poems have been widely published in such journals as the Southern Review, Rattle, The Sun, Prairie Schooner, and Alaska Quarterly. And his literary criticism can be found in American Poetry Review, Tupelo Quarterly, Rain Taxi, and Northwest Review. He has received his MFA from Pacific University and resides in the Queen City, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Medellin, Colombia. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to some, represent to others, A.E. Hines.
Thank you, Regina. When I grow up, I want to be able to be an MC like you. You do such a good job. And I'm so excited to be here with you guys, as always. You guys are so generous to me, and I really appreciate you having me. I also want to recognize Paul and Kathy, who are on the call as well with us, because they are the publishers of this book. And I have to say, the book is they've just a dream to work with. And I'm so thrilled with how the book came out, both in the layout, the feel of it, but particularly how this cover came out. I've had people, there are biblical, shall we say, archetypes in this book. Although it's if you're looking for a reenactment of Genesis, you're going to be somewhat disappointed, because it sort of uses those archetypes for different purposes. Usually sort of, someone asked me like, well, why do you put so much religious, so many gods, devils, and angels in these poems? And I'm like, well, I was raised in the southeast of North Carolina, so they're sort of in me. And I just have to make use of that when they show up. So that's why that kind of ended up being sort of a unifying, image for the book. But hopefully this gives you the sense that there's a lot of other themes that are explored here. I was thinking about this today. I think the book kind of explores then versus now. I think a lot of this book ends up sort of flashing back and forth between me at middle age, my experience of being alive now, particularly having moved back to North Carolina very recently after being away for so long, but also me then, right, when I left North Carolina. Many of the poems happened in my 20s. And so as such, that ended up being sort of a unifying thing in this book. And so because I'm going to be a risk taker, I'm going to start with a request and read the poem that Regina requested uh, to start the reading. And then I'll see if I can go from there. And the poem Regina requested was entitled The Crow. I was on the phone when the crow perched by my window this morning, flashed its wings against the glass, then slid off into the upper stories of a winter tree. And the person I was speaking with couldn't know I'd stopped listening to her, or that I'd been drawn to my window, trying to spot the last black feathers slipping into the leaves, splendidly green and laden with snow, or that the crown pointed straight to the ghost of a moon lingering in a sky so wide it might break open her art if only she'd been here to see it. We'd been speaking of forgiveness, how when we finally get around to it, the people we most need to forgive are gone, how others won't return our calls. And I knew this was important and true, that I should hang up, set about making a list, start dialing up the past, my parents and ex-lovers, all the neighbors I failed to help or who failed to help me, old friends I'd neglected, then lost. But by then, my friend was unreeling her own list into my ear. Then black talons and wings, a sky so bright and blindingly blue, icy thumbprint of the moon, just ripe for the eyes taking. So thank you. Yeah, that was fun to read out loud. Thank you, Regina. So it's funny, right? Because that's how it works. We think about doing what we should do when we should do it, and we come up with another reason to avoid doing it because it's hard. So, astronauts. It was dangerous then. Making love in a Carolina backyard. First, the hammock threatened to flip us to the ground, taking with it my nerve. Then you gasped at the sudden reach of my hand, which woke your fear, but not our classmates asleep inside. I spread a blanket and we undressed, silent, back to back, much like we would have in the locker room, each man neatly piling his clothes in opposing corners. The night was clear, the sky knitted with stars. We floated toward each other, summer astronauts on our first expedition. At first, clumsy in our experiments, each of us taking our time as fireflies circled our naked bodies, like blinking satellites or distant moons. Each of us edging closer to discovery we could not yet name. Thanks. I really appreciate being able to see you guys and do your things and do your hearts, because you guys have done this, right? It's like reading to yourself in the mirror without seeing your faces. So I'm sure you guys remember that back in 2022, we had just moved back to North Carolina, my husband and I, and shortly after, probably late in the 2022 timeframe, I think it was December, was when there was that terror attack, that domestic attack on the power grid and in the Southern Pines area of North Carolina. The rumor at the time that was kind of going around was that it had been perpetrated. It took some effort because they had to shoot, I think, 2 separate substations to ensure that the power was out for, I think it was out for 4 or 5 days, if I recall. One woman actually died because she didn't have access to power for medical equipment that she used at her home. So technically, homicide, I think. Anyway, at the time, there was a rumor, and whether it was true or not, it's hard to know, but it was coincident with a drag show that had been protested in Southern Pines as a fundraiser. And so a lot of people claim that that was why this had happened, because they had been unsuccessful in preventing these performers. And we all know that drag shows are the largest great threat to the U.S. stability since I don't know, the British maybe. So anyway, this poem that I wrote, it actually was in Rattle like the next day or next week, because it was one of those poets respond to the news poems. And it's one of those really rare occasions when a poem kind of comes out of me at once and it's done. This was one of those poems where it was pretty much, this was it. And the name of the poem is The Night the Lights Went Out in Moore County, North Carolina. And I guess I should say, you guys know the line by Bertolt Brecht that's pretty famous. Will there be singing? In the dark times, will there be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. So the first lines of this poem allude to his line, so I want to make sure I give credit for that. These must be dark times if you think shooting up a substation and blacking out the lights will shut down a drag show. Have you ever been to a drag show? Yes. There will be singing, even in the dark. Unflappable queens, black belting Beyonce and Madonna, hovering in the quivered glow of bar top candles. Silver beams from 100 mobile phones, showering them bedazzled songbirds, lashes glittering like wings and lifting them on a thin nest of stars on the soft breeze of applause and our waving dollar bills. We've labored in the night long enough to know how to fashion our own halos, make our own light. I doubt you've ever dropped a copper penny to preserve a vase of daisies, or know a jigger of vodka brings Valentine roses back to their feet. But no, you'll find no wilting flowers here, just at the edge of the stage. With its green, stiffened spine, the boozy and voluptuous tulip takes no bows. With outstretched petals outlasting gravity and death, it refuses to bend. Thank you. Speaking of Eastern North Carolina, this poem is called Incarnation. Before the body, Father, I was the lust in your myopic eye. Sigh of that coy child, the lunch counter waitress, who fetched you coffee and fried egg sandwiches for the months it took her to decide. Back then, I was still dust, ash rising in my own private universe of chlorophyll and sun, until I was the dust sucked up into her cornbread and boiled okra. Odds and ends she used to weave me into me. Tootsie Rolls and peanut butter cups. Sun-steeped iced tea she balanced on her ripening belly as I quietly willed myself into flesh. You think you made me, Father? Taking that girl, slight and virginal, wedding her across state lines where officials asked no questions, then breaking her like a horse when she begged for tenderness, pleading for a hospital when the bleeding wouldn't stop. They say the dead should hold their peace. But what do they say of the not yet breathing, who stand and watch from the gate, who fall backwards into this world from their wombs to open their mouths and speak? It's funny, I read that poem so often lately for these readings, and it still gets me every time. Maybe a tone change would be good. So how about this poem, which is called On Monogamy. We were 6 gay men by candlelight discussing fidelity. Monogamy was a fad. someone suggested. Gone once there were drugs to keep us alive. Tossed with our obsession for raising children and marriage, which had led to a thriving new industry for queer divorce. Then someone poured out the last of the wine. Someone else proposed firing up the hot tub. A man, not my husband, touched my hand, and another, not me, said honesty and trust were more important than faithfulness. I touched the muscled leg of my husband, which stiffened a little, as if we were dancing closer to a line we couldn't waltz back across. Then someone said he'd never toss a decades-old relationship over something so frivolous as an affair. My husband cleared his throat, and then the dishes. I followed him into our kitchen, and at the sink, wrapped my arms around his chest. The washer beneath our counter was empty, but he turned on the tap and handed me a towel so I could dry. And as the men undressed and slipped into our jacuzzi, we passed dishes between us, the way we still handled each other. Gently, each chipped plate as precious as the last. Thank you. All right, so let's see. Now, in honor of Karen's request, let's see how we do finding it. So a lot of this book, a lot of the imagery, the other idea that came from this sort of the unifying principle of the book is I wrote a lot of these poems in Colombia. And we have a little place in the country outside of Medellin. And it's like Eden. It's beautiful. And literally, this poem is pretty true in that we basically live outdoors in a jungle. And so the little village is called El Retiro, Colombia, which is the epigraph for this poem. And it's called Butterflies and Moths. Each morning I make a bone cage of my fingers, capture the flailing trapped against cabinets, inside our windows, release their flickering bodies like confetti set loose on the wind. Of course, most die, thrashing against the back of my knuckles or stuck in high places I can't reach. Dozens litter our floors at sunrise. Fluorescent blue eye shades, tiny emerald fans, bright, delicate-winged dead and half-dead, shifting in the quiet, stirred breeze of our hesitant steps. I gather these too, each small reflective hope swept gently into the bin. Place those still twitching on the fat branches of orange trees beyond the reach of rain. What do you call this foolish insistence? Not that the end not come, but that it not come too soon. Yesterday's efforts lie on the damp ground beneath these same branches. Silent wings, the same color as the sky. Thanks. So I have a son who's now, God, almost 21, be 21 this year. And here's a poem that involves him. And I think I've read this at a North Carolina poetry event before. So if I have, hopefully you liked it the first time. It's called Naturalization. We'd been lucky. I'd made it out of Guatemala alone with the baby, and the baby's still alive. I hadn't let him crawl out a hotel window. I hadn't let him swallow a button from my sleeve. Managed to feed him and change him and carry him in taxis and embassies, through markets and airports, beneath the electric barbed wire of U.S. immigration. In Houston, I watched badged women and men berate brown men in shackles while they sat tethered to stiff chairs beside us. Most stared at their shoes. I am embarrassed to admit I did nothing, said nothing, didn't catch a man's tired eye and offer even a nod, a word of my feeble Spanish. Instead, I just called my little son's name over and over, bouncing him on my lap. Then we were ushered back into the land I'd promised, bound together by law, and off to our next gate without a glance back at those men, detained, deported, on their way to whatever place they no longer called home. One of the reasons I think that poem is called Naturalization is I think the language we use around immigration is dehumanizing, and he was the lucky one. I was saying to someone recently, I said they asked me about the titles of some of the poems because some of the poems titles in this book use the word friend, and there's multiple poems that actually have the word friend in the title. And if you read the poems, you'll realize that there's a little bit of a bait and switch in that each of the poems also is really about betrayal. So here's one of those. And actually, these next two poems, I have to thank Charlotte Litt for publishing them first. I think this is how we came. I think this is how Kathy and Paul and I came to know each other, is because these two poems were first, I think, in the first issue of Litmosphere, right? So this one's called Find a Friend. Now, I must say this is also a cautionary tale about technology. So are you guys familiar with the feature in your iPhones that lets you find your friends? It used to be just called Find a Friend. Now it says Find My, but it's Find a Friend. It's important to know who's tracking you. You'll see why. Find a friend. It's like the sharpened stone flung from David's sling, striking Goliath's head. My then husband's glowing dot, this map on my phone, him not at the office or the hospital where he sees patients, not the grocery store he frequents for our family's provisions. The dot marks the spot with his name, but an address I don't recognize as any mutual friend or known place of business. Burns the insistent red of a target's bright eye, or the blood pumping through the heart. I can't help but hold my breath, releasing the taut string of the mind's bow, launching my inquisitive arrow at that tiny circle, which is not unlike the bullseye I have imagined at the heart of his heart, where I've loosed my ersatz arrows for years, always lodging them in the distant rings. It could have been a feather, this singular point of pixelated light bowling me over, but it's a rock, sharp to the softest part of my head. Isn't it a shame the things we have to live through to write a poem? This is the same. This poem was also in the same issue of Litmosphere. And it's called After the Adoption. When my lover is asleep, the wax moon lies cradled in the black pines, swaddled light streaming through our windows, and I creep back to the baby. I check bedding for loose blankets and ill-placed toys. See that he rests flat on his back, still breathing. Perhaps you too have done this. Found yourself awake on the edge of so much happiness, you fear fate might intervene. Which is to say, I am anxious when I touch my son's pink lips with my pinky. Feel the warm air moving in and out of his body. And why I watch for hours as shadow and moonlight waver from forehead to his round, dimpled cheek. By morning, I can write a thesis on how it happens, the filling of tiny lungs, how the fluttering wings expand and release, rise and fall, over and over, with no help at all from me. All the yours guys are all poets, so you'll appreciate this. Like the big edit in this poem after like many, many times was, okay, is it no help from me at all? Or is it that, or should I change it and say no help at all to rhyme with fall? Anyway, that's the things we do besides moving commas. I think Joan requested this poem, so it's called Cervical Stenosis. This is there's several poems in this book about medical issues. I think the part of that then and now that I was talking about at the beginning, I seem to keep bouncing between, we at a certain, I think it's probably in our 50s. It's sort of we're at the uppermost point of that hill, but it's on the downside of the slope. It's on the other side of the peak. And, things start to break. People start to die. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the body as the garden and how that turns over like everything else. Here's one poem that came from that. It's called Cervical Stenosis. It starts by unzipping the flesh at the front of my neck. A 6-inch incision, the surgeon thumbing the venous contents like a collection of antique vinyl records. Blunt dissection, he calls it, to push aside trachea, esophagus, carotid arteries. I imagine one gloved hand wedged inside, disappearing into the blue haze of my throat chakra, the metaphysical seat of expression, mechanical pipe organ of speech. And I can't speak, imagining him slice the apple below my mouth as if parting me like soft velvet curtains to find that small stack of bones. I can't speak when he shows me his silver pick, the tiny hammer, how he will chisel away the offending disc and pop it out like a rusty coin stuck in the slot of a jukebox. Somewhere, I hear music playing. Somewhere, a woman is laughing. When he pries apart those 2 dull bones, his spotlight will shine across the bare white cord, tethering every future thing. At the back of the stage, a small portion of spine, naked and brave, will open its small bone mouth and sing. A poet friend of mine said, you should never end singing in a poem. You should not end singing. And I was like, I'm leaving it there. I'm leaving it. Take feedback when it works. So this book also deals with climate, as if you guys have read it or read parts of it. So here's one that does that. And it's called No Small Happiness. To imagine the earth will go on without us brings me no small happiness. And with little faith in God, modest comfort to believe I might escape further judgment. After all, what would either of us have to say? Even as my son hugs me goodbye this morning, I know the ways I've failed him, how we all keep failing. The planet's inheritance already squandered. They say all a man has in the end are his memories, but I won't take even these into oblivion. No need for an afterlife, endless time to climb the same regretful stairs, reliving a life I've shoved like a grand piano into a room too small to hold it. Such a pleasure to know I'll be gone, whittled away to nothing, and yet still crawling in whatever low creature survives in this world to crawl. Cockroach and silverfish, the simple ant, Why does it bring me such peace? This notion of disappearing. To know when Jesus spoke of the meek, he didn't mean us. Have been accused of blasphemy. I've got about, how are we doing on time? I've got about 3 more I was going to read.
You go with it.
Okay.
Yes.
You guys all appear to still be awake, so I'm gonna carry on. I got married during the pandemic, which has been really good for my writing because I got to write a lot of love poetry. I've got this wonderful muse and this husband of mine. We got married in 2020 during the pandemic, and literally the wedding was March 27th, 2020. So, we didn't really have a wedding. But we've been celebrating ever since. We just celebrated our 4 years together since the wedding, so we're very happy. And this poem is for my husband. There's a few sonnets in the book. I was experimenting more with forms, and I felt like the sonnet was at least the American sonnet, so we could argue about what that's defined as, but it has 14 lines. So this is one of those poems, and it's called Paper Anniversary. Everybody know that's first anniversary, first year? Paper Anniversary. It was the night of the worm moon, low and full in the March sky, though we couldn't see it, not under the wool blanket of clouds. You were standing at the counter cutting vegetables when I offered you 2 paper cranes, folded triangles of Japanese silk print, speckled pixels of red and gold that caught the light in the fine net of your palms. I wanted to give you more. A dozen bouquets, a dozen anniversaries, an endless river of years. But I was 50, you already 52, and the cranes made only of paper. Thank you. Another sonnet. Fat City Pigeon. In a terrace garden 22 stories up against the pastel dawn, you squat on a rail while I dangle my feet above this small bed of green, feeding the ravenous plants the thin clippings of my toenails. I ask myself why I have judged you as ugly. With your steel petticoat and gray patrician gown, you could be my great-grandmother, lounging in her jeweled necklace of amethyst and jade. Have you come back to sell me on heaven? As you lift and shake out your arthritic wings, the sun splinters and ripples across a valley pillared with glass. Heaven nowhere but here. The city revving its engines, death in the distance, rehearsing her song. Damn it, I ended another poem singing. You guys are great. I really appreciate it. I look forward to chatting on the other side of this, but I wanted to end this poem or end this reading with the final poem in the book, and it is entitled Some Quiet Evenings. I go out to sit with them, thin insects tuning their strings, the night's first bat casting in the breeze, and remember that evening, hot and windless, a new lover stripping my bed, spreading my sheets on the moonless grass. Who were we then? Young and swallowed by the night, unfinished, ill-matched. Sirius trudged across my narrow field of sky, the whole universe sliding away, a little more life slipping out of me again so briefly in love. Some quiet evenings I go out to sit with them, all the men I've been, and beneath the same quilt of stars retrace my path, the weak orbit of every man to touch me. Thank you.
Oh my God. It was as wonderful as what I just knew it was gonna be wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And if you all want to come off mute and show your appreciation, come off mute and show your appreciation. Yes, I'm gonna.
Oh, woo!
Yeah,
That was
Wow.
stunning.
Thank you.
awesome, awesome. Um, I'm going to take this time. I know several of you may have questions for Earl. I know Karen is our Q&A facilitator over here. I'm going to let her take those reins and lead us in the questioning. She came into we came in a little bit early. She already had questions. So
I
I'm
always have
going to
questions.
uh, pin Karen and also pin Earl. And there we go.
The pinning thing, honestly, Regina. So, yeah, let's ask Earl some really personal questions. No, Earl,
All in the book, so go ahead.
I
He's
know,
all in the
right? It's all
poems.
here. We have it already. Listen, I'm loving this book. I love your writing. I love your reading. It's just such a delight. And I am just infinitely curious about so many things. One of which is, how did these poems come to be in this collection? Did you have a vision for it and you wrote to the vision, or did you throw a bunch of papers up and say these are in the book? What in the world? How'd you do
Well,
this?
you know,
Amazing.
that's a really good question. I was in a conversation with Dorian Locks last night, sort of a two-way conversation we were talking about, and she was talking about an example of where once she had written a few poems, she realized she could like pick a theme and run towards it. And I actually resonated with that. That's sort of what happened. So, but I honestly don't think that happens for me until, or at least in this case, didn't happen until much later in the process. I mean, I was doing an MFA at the time most of these poems were written. So my first book had come out in 2021, and I thought, oh God, what am I going to write about now? Right? Because that first book, I mean, for most people, that first book is kind of a book of identity. For me as a more narrative poet, it was so highly autobiographical. Not that these aren't. I just think there was a lot more experimentation with lyric, I hope, in these poems, and there was less obsession with story and fact and plot that I think compared to the first book. At least that was part of my intention. But so having to produce just a ridiculous number of poems rapidly because I was in a program, which is actually one of the reasons I signed up for the program, because I wanted that pressure, helped me generate a lot of work. And so it was during the pandemic initially when these started, and I happened to be setting in Colombia. So initially, a lot of the poems that are set in Colombia came, right? There was, I was like, well, what am I going to write about? And well, there's birds and butterflies, and this is beautiful. And so pretty soon, I started thinking about the fact that it was also very fleeting. I was talking about being in my 50s and having sort of that, lying in the hammock on William Duffy's farm moment when you're like, oh my God, why haven't I paid attention to these things when I was younger? Because they're fleeting not only because of potential climate catastrophe, but they're fleeting because I'm older now. And that became part of what unified the poems. And then I had some unifying themes. I seem to be pretty afraid of death and dying, so that ends up being in the book. A few people did die, that ends up in the book. I've had a few health scares, that ends up in the book. So I just basically took everything I wrote, and I would say that when I started this book, Kathy or Paul probably know how many poems are in it. I don't remember. I think it's 64, 65, it's like 60-ish poems, right? Probably had 120 poems when I started, and I did lay them all out. And then I said, all right, what are the themes here? And I tried to, another way I look at it, you guys, if you're familiar with Richard Hugo's approach to sort of the discovered subject versus the triggering subject for a poem, where you enter a poem, or at least what generates the poem is about something deeper than that, or one would argue to be a successful poem, it should be about something deeper and discovered that you discover along the way of writing it. And so I'll go around and I'm like, what was the triggering subject? It was the bird in the tree, right? But what was the discovered subject? And so I would look for sort of tones and themes that repeated, and then I'd group them that way. So I'd group them in different ways. And then I'd say, okay, which things belong and which things don't. There's a couple of Ars Poeticas in there. That's easy to kind of mix in, especially if the imagery relates. And that was the process I followed. And then that was how I weeded out Like I have poems, like I wrote a poem as an example. I had a poem that was written right after John Lewis's death, that had been published, and I really wanted it in this book. And I was talking to my mentor, Andrea Hollander, about this, my long-term friend. And she said, it's a great poem. It doesn't belong in this book. But because it ended up talking about the 2020 riots, and it was talking about, because he died during the George Floyd protest period. And I kind of had this conceit of him being in heaven and shutting down heaven because of civil disobedience. And I loved the poem. I had angels and trumpets. And I was like, it fits this, but it didn't fit it. So it had to go. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's in the pile. So you have to be kind of ruthless that way. And one way is, if you have more than you need, you're not going to publish usually a book with 120 poems. So, you got to get it down to a reasonable amount. And that's how I did it. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that was amazing. Oh my goodness, you more than answered it. That was, yeah, that was great.
I mean, I talked a lot. I don't know if I stayed on.
No, I feel like you opened the window and you just like gave us everything. That was great. That
There
was
is a
amazing.
question from Joan. There are
Oh.
in the chat.
Where I can't see it.
Okay. She
Jen,
says,
do you
in
want-
what ways has your MFA changed your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I gave my graduate talked a lot about why I went into the MFA, which is partially to figure out if I was going to be serious about poetry and writing. I wrote that first book. The pandemic helped. I was at early part of the pandemic. I finished it. So I was like, okay, I had some time, I had some space. I knew I wanted to shift my life towards writing and poetry. But I had this imposter syndrome fear that, yeah, but I wrote one book, can I write a second book, or would I write it? What would I write about? Do I have anything to say? Do I have anything worth saying that hasn't been said? And that's basically imposter syndrome. All that's bullshit. We all have plenty to say. We're all unique subjectivities living on the earth. And the fact that we even exist is a miracle, right? Of all the possible humans that exist or could have existed. So we all have something to say. But that's what I was going through. And I thought, well, do I have the habits then? Do I have the habits to force myself to be disciplined in writing and not put it aside? And I thought the MFA might allow me to, A, work with teachers that I wanted to work with, but also adopt those habits. So what I would say is that it really did hone my ability to sort of forget about what I'm trying to produce and just produce, just write. So it doesn't have to be important. It doesn't have to result in a poem. You just have to write, because I got used to, okay, every 3 weeks, I've got to have a 40-page packet of material to send somewhere. And it teaches you to read like a writer. So that was the way it changed me a lot. So now I'd say of the time I spend writing, about 50% of that time dedicated to the arts is reading. And I say that a lot now. I think you should spend at least as much time reading contemporary poetry or any poetry compared to the time you're writing, because I think that's going to improve your writing. And it gives you something to respond to and react to, and it just incubates. So that's how it changed me, because now, like, I'd never written a review, for example, and now I've had like 4 reviews published. And it taught me how to analyze and criticize. And then I learned things like the biggest thing I took away, I think, in terms of learning was sort of the difference between the narrative and the lyric mode, and how to balance narrative versus lyric in a poem and what that can do. And so I'd say it widened my palette. And now the way I look at writing is that each time I sit down to like work on something, I go, this is just going to be something it's a process, not a product. And poems will come. I trust they'll come when they're ready. And I am a poet. So that's what I got out of my MFA, John. I decided I was a poet.
Good. We're glad you made that decision, Earl.
Right. Right.
I'm a manic poet with high energy.
It's great. It's all great. It's great.
There's another question we have in the chat as well from Lucinda True.
Oh, hi, Lucinda. I know Lucinda.
Hello. Hey, Earl.
Hi there.
She says,
What's your question? I can't see it.
exquisite poems, Earl. That's Lucinda. I'm being Lucinda. Thank you. I'm intrigued by how our place of origin affects our work. I am an Eastern North Carolina native too. What is it about that hot, sticky corner of the state that inspires?
That's interesting.
Mm.
It's interesting because I wouldn't use the word inspiration to describe it for me. Which is not a slight. I'm actually thinking, I think, I think I spend so much time as a young person running from there. I think
Mm.
now, because I had a pretty tough upbringing, and it was a very repressive, not a very love-filled. I didn't read it tonight, but if you read this poem called "The Fall" in the book, I mean, it kind of describes that home life. I think it's reconcile for me. Like I reconcile. Okay, how do I say it? This is a great question. I think everything when we write a poem, it's really not about us. When it's out in the world, right? It's about the readers and and so I really think that what we're doing with our own life experience, wherever it's from, is trying to recycle it and repurpose it in art. And so for me, I have so much, those formative years were so steeped in that particular environment that, I was raised in a Pentecostal evangelical church environment. I was preaching at Youth Sunday by the time I was 13. So they were volunteering to send me to seminary by the time I was 16. It was not for me, but it imprinted on me in such a way that they end up in my work. It ends up in my work because it can't not. It was so formative. And it allows me to it allows me to make it worth, in a way, more than it's worth to me now, if that makes any sense, because I can reuse it in some artifice. Does that help? I don't know if I really thoroughly answered that very well.
It does. It does. And you mentioned you used the word recycle, but I wonder too if our past and our place, does poetry help us reconcile with that?
I think it does. One of the things I'm writing about now is this notion of what is home. So I've been really focused on, it starts to emerge in this book, but like coming back to North Carolina, I think I came back to North Carolina partially to redeem North Carolina for myself. And I think that's important. So I do think it's amazing how often people go away as young people, and then no matter whether it's physically or in some other way, they sort of have to come back. And this book talks so much about ashes and dust. Maybe I wanted to put roots back down in the soil that I sprang from. And I just want to say this, though, it's not, writing it may feel therapeutic, but I don't think it's a substitute for good therapy. So it's helpful, but it's not therapy. Because I honestly, sometimes you revisit some of these things and trauma can just be trauma. And you don't necessarily owe anyone else your trauma if it's useful for you to put it in a poem. But I don't think you necessarily have to put your traumas in poems, except if they're useful for the poem. If it's therapeutic for you, you don't necessarily have to show it to anyone. But, writing is therapeutic. Don't get me wrong. There must be therapists in there. Joan's a therapist. Aren't you a therapist? But you could probably comment on this better than I can. But yeah, so I think it can be therapeutic, but I don't think it's a substitute for therapy, which is my plug for get good mental health counseling if you need it, and if you were raised by the people that raised me.
Wow. Do we have any other questions looming? Now is the time. Now is the time. Okay. Thank you so much, Earl, for just putting it all on the floor for us. We so appreciate you talking, not just reading your poems, but just kind of giving us your honest thought. We thank you. And now comes the time for you, the audience, to participate in this grand adventure. I have Shamala, Michael, Joan, Laura. Is there anyone else who would like to read for open mic?
I see Cal's hand, Kathy. Throw me in there somewhere, Regina.
Okay, Cal, Kathy.
Darcy.
Okay, Cal,
Darcy.
Kathy,
Joan,
Darcy.
Joan, are you raising your hand? Because your hand's out of frame.
I've already thrown my name in the hat.
Oh, right. Joan was early. So Shamala, Michael, Joan, Laura, Cal, Kathy, Darcy, Karen.
Regina.
Well, I was going to go last.
Okay. Just want to make sure
because we wanted to conclude with I'm going to attempt Earl's palindrome. So okay. Anyone else? Christy, I didn't hear you. Are you planning?
I would, but I got new lenses and I can't even see you right now. I'm trying out these new glasses and they're not working.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that is fine. So we're gonna kick this off with Shamala, if I can find her. Oh, there she is. Okay. On my screen, you ready?
Yeah.
Yep, here we go.
Thank you for these poems earlier. Wonderful. And it's fascinating the thing that you said about running away and then coming home to redeem yourself at some stage. It's also true. I'm sitting in Malaysia for the first time in 30 years. But this is something that I wrote at the other end of the process as a very young immigrant in New York. Chicken crossing. Why does a chicken cross the road? To get run over. Anyway, that's what immigrants do. They're to reassemble themselves. A wing here, a flattened beak there, into a different shape, free to not be chickens. To escape chicken land, but vestigial impulses remain, especially in the food. See immigrants all over New York City, hunting for hot sauce or pickled fish or fermented eggs, scratching the concrete as back in chicken land, their relatives scratch the earth. And then there are all those oddly carried over feathers, saris at the UN and cheongsams and kente cloth in boardrooms. But can we really do this? Concrete is stronger, they say, but so much harder. Why does a chicken cross the road?
Wow.
Wow.
I'm wowing on mute. I'm sorry. Wow. And what wow. The use of that the chicken crossing that's new. That's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Shamala. Okay, I'm gonna unpin you. Next we have Michael Renshaw. I'm coming at you.
Okay, this is sometimes driving down the roads and stuff, you see a house falling down on the side of the road and you kind of wonder where it came from or what happened. Maybe like we were talking about, you go away from a place and then come back and wonder, what would it have been like if I'd been there and stuff. So this one's called Maybes. Hopes collapsed and lost dreams, wearied by time, slowly become maybes. Photos I capture of houses crumbling beside lost country lanes are remnants of long faded and wind-shattered lives. I snap sagging wood door frames, hints of peeling yellow paint, clapboard siding rotted through, weeds choking broken steps leading into someplace long ago. I enter, musty shadows, single-hinged screen door limps shut behind me, a bare echo of slams once heard on bright summer's days. A kitchen wall, a faded photo, man, woman, two small children, fading into once flowered wallpaper, molding into oblivion, vanishing. Somehow, living here stopped, leaving only traces of what might have been, if only, maybe, things had been different.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Michael. That was beautiful. Okay. Next, We have Joan. Joan,
Here I am.
very good. Take it away.
Benjamin Knox Taylor. Undated, the gray cardboard it's glued to, ripped and crumbling. The photo of the tailor shop at 26th and Christian must have been taken for an advertisement in the Yiddish papers. Its sepia tones are faded. My grandfather, bullishly handsome, is posed at a desk too small for him, ankles crossed, poised as if writing in a ledger. He's exiled in the corner of an expanse of cracked linoleum. Against the wall, one bentwood chair, a table with an open pattern book, another table stacked with 7 bolts of wool. Hanging crookedly on patterned wallpaper, sketches for dresses my grandmother sewed upstairs where the family lived. Benjamin made men's suits in the shop. Behind him, the wall of a dressing room, a dressmaker's dummy, a corner of a window. Off camera, the sewing machine and the steam presser. Pressing men's suits was his bread and butter, what paid rent and put food in his children's mouths when people weren't buying. The ceiling is high. The hanging light fixture doesn't hang past the wainscoting. A clock is hung so high it seems merely ornamental. Benjamin, a short man, is dwarfed in the corner of his shop, creased into his chair. I see the pinch of a starched high white collar. His jacket is expertly fitted to his bulky upper body. This grandfather, who put his head in the oven a week before the war ended.
Oh, Joan, powerful imagery and your use of the words that describe this space. And you're talking about being creased into his chair and just beautiful, very powerful.
I wonder if you can see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to have Miss Laura Younger. This pen. Where are you, Laura? Oh, there you are. There we go.
That. Well, in keeping with the theme of leaving to come back, I doubt I'll ever live in Michigan again. God, I hope not. But I do write a lot about my experiences as a child there, and there's some of that in this. This poem's called What to Wear. I dressed for the party. Smooth silk whispers over newly softened, clean skin, and the many layers that erase and encase me, the Spanx, the pantyhose, the bra, all the corrections of my imperfections to present the version that others expect me to be. I hated those scratchy, lace-trimmed, identical dresses my mother bought for us. No identity apart from my twin sister in matching pink organdy. And those demure lace head coverings we wore to Mass each Sunday, Easter, Christmas. What show were we making anyway? By the time we left the church, my twins' lace-edged bobby socks were crumpled and soiled, the bow at her waist, crooked, mussed. I never knew how she managed that, confined to one place, trapped in that pew, just sitting, standing, kneeling, rinse, repeat. At home now, I wear wide-legged cotton sweatpants, soft t-shirts, sweaters, cocooned in comfort, perfectly at ease. If you come into my space, this is what you get, take it or leave it. In the secret world of self, I wear a size 2 in sleek silk sheath dresses that skim my frame in perfect comfort. I wear 4-inch heels. and I run like a gazelle.
Yes. If you come into my space, this is what you get. Yes. Yes. Feel that. Feel all of that. All right, Cal, I'm coming to you. There we go. Cal, can't hear you.
You're muted.
There we go. Now you can hear me. Okay. Took me a bit to get the right button to show up. This is called The Artist. To freeze time, a monument in a courtyard, a fossil, a flower pressed in a book, a butterfly pinned to a wall or stuck flat behind glass. Why can't we see anything until we stop it? Those particles that you can't examine without changing, why? They don't exist. We make them particles when we stop them from being mere points in a flow, coordinates in a chart that's missing certain axes. We press things flat to understand. An old photo, words of ink on a page. Eternal is the dead. Life moves, sparkles in another's eyes, an instant common sense of what is what. Some wind on a leaf, rain on hot tar, the touch of a hand, then let go. Thank you.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Ah.
Karen says we press things flat to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next we have Kathy. Kathy Collins. Coming to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for doing this tonight. Earl, terrific reading, and all the rest of you too. This one is after Gabrielle Calvacaresi. Miss you, would like to pitch a tent with you. Do not care if you have money for the campsite. Would love to pick this one up. Pick up firewood while I'm at it. Set your lawn chair close to mine. Miss you. Would like to stir a pot of mac and cheese on the Coleman stove like you used to when we all got so tired of the city. Sit around the picnic table, orange sauce oozing through white paper plates. Would love to walk up Fosco Creek with you all the way to the dam. Damn, I miss you. Wish you would unzip your guilt body. Would love to help you burn it. Imagine how light you could feel, how free your arms. We could fling the Frisbee until dark, pop open Pepsis, pop some corn. Would like to ask you to leave that book on the pew. Miss you. Wish you believed what you say, that we are truly forgiven. Just for today, let's turn off the TV. Forget who is president, not argue about the earth's shape. The breeze off the river feels holy. I'd love you to feel it. Love to show you there's nothing to forgive.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Miss you. Wish you. I love the way you play with words and the repetition and the, what is the word? Assonance.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to give Gabby Calvacaresi credit for that, because she put that music in my ear. Yeah.
Very good.
Thank
you
you
so much. All right. Coming to you, Darcy. Darcy,
Oh.
Darcy. Where is Darcy? There
Right
she
here.
is.
This is my first Hyben, and it's been accepted for publication. So, oh,
Congratulations.
it's the title. Okay, the title, Hope Threads the Needle. Grief moon, no safe passage to daybreak. Rivers of regret run through her, bare the weight of water. Find comfort in a face etched in black and gray treetops. It appears in the fading light outside her window. Marry secrets to the grave. Bushwhack through a tangled wood of broken dreams, early deaths, and what's this? A crimson bud.
Wow. Wow. Thank you and congratulations. You said your first Haibun? Wow. Very good. Very good. Thank you so much. Next we have Karen. Karen,
Me?
you.
Okay, this is I am going to read an ekphrastic poem that was based on this photograph by Ann Hicks.
What is
But
this?
of course, it's trees. The name of the photograph is Roots. So it's like a big an uprooted tree in a swamp, I think, where the it's like literally climbing up out of the earth.
Right.
Yeah. So this is my ekphrastic poem, but of course it's not actually about the photograph. So there we go. After Roots. Something in the black and white of the photograph. No, nothing is ever black and white. There is gray here, and gray shades of gray. Grays. Grays on the light here. Of course, the shadow too, and always the weeds, which are plants unnamed, proclaimed somehow unwanted, unplanned, unworthy. The sticks, twigs, thistle, budding shoots, and saplings that could be a song, long for a song, but this is about the rising up from the seemingly unimportant. The rising up is the thing from some seed, having had some sprouting up of stem into trunk, into leaf, into going down too, into root, into ground, earthing with uprising up. Tree always reaching for something else, like sky, like I, lowercase, like I might be trying to capitalize on, like reaching up, like I, capital I.
Yes. The rising up is the thing.
The rising up is the thing.
That is sticking with me. You may hear it again. No. Wonderful. That's my co-partner in brilliant shenanigans, Karen.
Zoom buddies.
Zoom buddy. Poetry sis. Thank you so much. I'm going to put in the chat some things that are happening in the life of A.E. Hines. He is going to this Sunday be at Park Roads Books. That's 421 Charlotte, in Charlotte. So if you're in Charlotte on the 21st, to go by Park Roads Books in Charlotte, check him out. On May the 5th, he will be at Malaprops in Asheville. And there's more information on that at his on his website, www.aehines.net. And also, as a special reminder, Earl will be hosting an audience Q&A and conversation on stage with, oh my heart, Pulitzer Prize winning poet Jericho Brown.
Wow.
After Brown's highly anticipated performance in Charlotte on the evening of May 1st. This will be presented by Charlotte Lit, and you can find more details about this special event and purchase tickets at www.charlottelit.org. And then I see Paul has added something here. Sunday at PRB in conversation with Kathy Collins. Okay, so it's all there. You can copy and paste it. You can save this chat. Do whatever you have to do to go and support our guy, Earl A.E. Hines. We are so excited that you have been able to share with us on this evening. We talked about it earlier. I asked him, I said, look, don't you want to close it with one of your poems? And he was like, no, I don't really want to do that, but it would be fun if you did. So here I am. Oh my gosh. Sharing this poem, Family History. And there is something about, I just want to make a statement because I grew up born in Texas. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. And it is a very different place. You know, the land shapes you. And there are some things I won't even get into. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm just gonna read.
Okay, make a little announcement.
But you're giving me ideas for poems, so keep talking.
Right. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about how the land shapes us, how the land has shaped our people, you know, and the responses to the kind of life that this area has brought that impacts the family. We'll talk about that. I'm babbling because I'm thinking and talking at the same time. Okay.
I'd like to announce a reading this Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. I have no idea what time that is in Malaysia, but I think it's probably about 4 in the morning, right? It's a Zoom event, and if you want the Zoom address, you can reach me at Cal Nort on Messenger. That's the easiest way. I'm also Cal Nort with no spaces at Gmail. Anyway, Terry Kirby Erickson and Larry Couch will be reading, and I think it's going to be really excellent reading with an open mic afterwards.
Okay. Thank you so much, Cal. And if you have that somewhere, feel free to stick it in the chat so that, you know, we can keep up with that. And I do want to say, I wish I could give a prize to the person that came, you know, from the furthest away. Shamala, we love you. We're glad to see you here. What time is it there?
It's a 12-hour time difference with North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
So it's not too bad, but yesterday was a travel day, a very long travel day because it's the end of the Eid festival. So there's returning pilgrims and going back to their home villages.
Right.
I'm so delighted to be here.
Yeah.
And be in both places at the same time.
So it's 8 Thursday morning right now where you are, 8:16 Thursday morning.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Good morning.
Absolutely.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
Thank you, and good evening to y'all.
Okay, this poem is a poem. We're going to close out with this. A poem written by the incomparable A.E. Hines. It is entitled Family History. The way my mother tells it, I ran away. She didn't shove me out the front door at 16. Afterwards, she remembers my little sister possessed by a poisonous anger, but has no recollection of dragging her through the house by her hair. The history of our family was oral, repeated to herself in the splotched bathroom mirror, where everything came out backwards. Backwards, everything came out of that mirror, where she repeated our family history with no recollection of dragging my sister through the house by her hair, of her own poisonous anger, or me at 16 pleading at our front door. She didn't shove me. I ran away. Thank you. I'm gonna take myself off pen.
Wow.
And I just want to thank Earl for just giving us this inspiration. I thank all of you for sharing your work with us as well. We are always excited to highlight members of our poetry community. Earl is in our community. I'm like, how did we get to be so lucky to have Earl?
I'm the lucky
to
one.
have each other. Yes.
I'm very lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. You're cool. I'll never forget when I met you. I won't go into that. I'll be talking. So I'm gonna stop talking. Stop talking, Regina. Okay. I
So,
hope you all have a good evening. I want you to make sure you save the chat. Oh, thank you, Kathy. Kathy says, thank you, Regina, and the rest of the NCPS team. Such a nice evening. And thanks, Earl, for writing those magnificent poems.
yes,
Those magnificent poems.
yes.
All right.
So Regina, do you, I know you want to tell everybody where the recording is going to be so that you can really relive this wonderful evening
Yes, you will be
in the
able
near
to
future.
relive this wonderful evening.
Recording?
The recording, that's what I'm trying to say, will be on Facebook on the NCPS page, but it will also be on YouTube. And so I will put that link on the page, and it will also be on YouTube. And Earl, I'll send you both links so you don't have to wonder about where it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good. It's been a great evening.
Thank you
I
so
love
much,
you.
Aaron, Regina, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you.
Thank
Oh
you.
my goodness.
And
Thank
you
you,
all
everybody.
Thank you so much.
have a marvelous night. Okay. Bye.